Hi everyone, it's Brenda back again with another episode of Three Uniques. Today I have on Sherry McMillian. Hey Sherry, how are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. So Sherry comes
Good.
to us she's got a technology and business analyst background. But her real exciting thing that she's going to talk about with us today, not that technology and business analysis isn't exciting, but Sherry's recently written a book. You can see it on anyone that's watching it on YouTube can see it over her shoulder. Thank you for demonstrating. It's called What the Seal Saw. So Sherry, when did the book come out? Tell us a little bit about the journey of writing this book.
Thanks, Brenda. So it came out in October of 2021. And one of the really interesting things about that journey is that I had been thinking about publishing for years. And in fact, there's one particular novel that I was burning to write. And I was trying to figure out like where I could find the time and space with my busy, demanding career and being a mom and all these other things. How could I find time and space to write that book? And it ended up not being the book I wrote. So part of that journey was by the time that I had the idea for this book, from ideation to publication was less than a year. So it just was like a real head spinning sequence of events, certainly accelerated by COVID,
Mhm.
certainly gave a little bit more time and space for that. But it was an interesting part of the journey that it was something that I was working through for really actively for about 3 years. And then when the inspiration struck, it happened so fast. It was really, I just felt like I was trying to keep up with the idea.
And you were telling me before we press record, kind of like where the idea came from as far as like what the seal saw and why you wanted to get into children's poetry and writing.
Right. So I had been talking with some other friends that are artists or authors, and also with the career coach, talking through what my options would be for writing this really ambitious novel that I wanted to write. And one of them, a friend who's an author, said to me on a Zoom call, Sherry, why don't you think about writing something less demanding? That book that you're looking to write is probably a 3-year project
Right.
with R&D and first draft and second draft, etc. So have you thought about writing something that's a little shorter, a little less time consuming? And, it's just like such a simple, straightforward, practical idea, but I had not thought about that. And then all of a sudden it hit me, the stacks of journals and folders everywhere. So I'm always writing short stories. I'm always writing poetry. There's always some journaling happening, phrases and stuff. And even then, I didn't know what I wanted to write, or probably what's more true is I had far too many ideas of what I'd written or half written and which I wanted to push over the line and be something that I would put my name on. It would be my first published work that I'd invest in, right? So it's a lot of
Right.
pressure there. So in the meantime, as it so happens, over COVID, I picked up the lovely um, hobby slash sport of kayaking. So I'm
Cool.
fortunate enough to live right in Semiahmoo Bay. I'm a
Right.
1 minute drive, a 10-minute walk, but not with the kayak on my shoulders. So
Right.
that would be a whole other thing. But yeah, so I'm kayaking, and really, there's something really interesting about that sport. It's very meditative, right? So there's actually a rhythm. There's actually a cadence. It's my
Mhm.
happy place. I'm very meditative, really on my own. Really, just a place where my thoughts can flow free, and I'm not usually interrupted. Um, but I'm out in the middle of nowhere and a seal pops up as they do. And I just spontaneously speak to it because I'm goofy, and maybe most people do, but I just kind of called up to the seal. But it came out in rhyming verse. So I just spontaneously said, hey there, little seal, what do you see? I see you. Do you see me? And then I chuckled at myself. I thought, well, that's really goofy. And then instantly I thought that would be a good children's book.
Yeah.
And I just kind of put that in my back pocket and went about life. But for about 2 weeks, that was really on my mind. It just really rattled. And I just kept thinking that would be a good children's book. And then I thought, well, why not? Why not see what you can do? And so part of the thing that's really had legs, so to speak, like part of the journey of this book was that I think when you have a really authentic personal experience and then you lean into it,
Mhm.
you accidentally then tap into the universal. Because I thought I was writing something very, very personal, very unique, very specific. Because I would just took my kayak out as I do, and every time I was out there, I would try to write a verse. So a flock of geese flies over me, and I write the geese verse. And I've got my phone in a waterproof pouch hanging around my neck, so I used a voice recorder
Oh, cool.
And
Yeah.
as much as I could, when you're juggling the paddle and you've got
Yeah.
the gloves on and everything, but I really truly was actively writing in the kayak, and I would just try to encapsulate one image at a time. So I see the seals look at the starfish as they're clinging to the legs of the
Oh,
pier,
neat.
and that becomes a verse, right? And I
Yeah.
see the schools of silver gray fish dashing, and that becomes a verse. And I just tried to really be as authentic as possible. And although I really was quite certain it would be a children's book, I didn't want to speak down to the children. I wanted to use like exactly the right word. And so again, being in the kayak and just being in that meditative state, it was really conducive to writing poetry, because I could really just think like, what is exactly the right word? What do I really see? And so I started to draft it. Another way that COVID sort of dovetailed with this writing journey is that I have many nieces and nephews, and they have children. So I'm a great aunt. I'm a great
Hmm.
aunt, but I've been a great aunt many times over. And I thought at one point to see if was there a way that I could pitch in when we were quarantined and couldn't visit each other. I started Zooming story time with Auntie Sherry. And so I would have the little ones on and I'd read them a story. And so when I had a draft of my own story, I read it to them. And I know they're a bit biased, but I got big thumbs up from them and they liked it. And then I started thinking about the illustrations. And it so happens that I have a childhood friend who grew up to be an amazing artist.
Hmm.
So I reached out to her and I said, Carla, feel free to say no. Feel free to think about it. Feel free to tell me what a fair price is. Feel free to back out later. Like I just put all these caveats around it. But I
Right.
said, could you by any chance think that you might want to be the illustrator of this book? And she lit up. She was so excited. With COVID, all of her art therapy work had dried up. She'd always wanted to be an illustrator. And
Hmm.
then I just gained like the best partner ever. So she would text me images and I would freak out and think it was the best thing I'd ever seen. And then 2 days later, she'd send me something that was even better. And we didn't know what we didn't know. So we were just going fast to be released for Christmas. Now we realize that was stupendous that we actually went from the
Yeah.
first draft to
It just seems
available.
like it's like what you said when you put it out to the universe, right? Like you might think that this idea that you have is just, a hunch or an idea that no one else would ever connect with. And then you haven't even sold it at this point, the story that you're telling. It's like you're enrolling your nieces and nephews and like, children in your family, and then you're enrolling your friend to be the illustrator. And everyone is just sort of like coming out of the woodwork, right? To support you in this. You still haven't even sold the book yet, but this is amazing because there's all this alignment that's happening. So there's a story in that, like for all of our listeners, is that sometimes we spend too much time in our head already telling the story of how something's going to turn out versus I think this is a great example where you just like leaned into it and you're just like, you know what, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I'm just going to keep connecting people to this story, to this vision I have for my book, and here we are.
Yeah, it's so true. And, I'm an analyst by nature and then by trade, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, my analysis skills are pretty finely tuned. And so, I do want to apply some analysis. I want to apply the best practice to it. And
Mhm.
certainly it was handy when I was doing things like figuring out, okay, how do I want to publish, and then doing a vendor selection on publishers and things like
Right.
that. But that aside, the idea of just being brave and thinking that, okay, let's put it out there. And I know Carla and I in particular, we had some conversations about the time and the other investments, and they're just saying, if at the very least we're putting something out good out into the universe,
Mhm.
and is it the one and only thing I'll ever do, or that I'm defined by? Like I just have to get over that and just go, it's one step toward a bigger goal. And also, I think that I would often throughout this process, I'm laughing because um, this image just popped into my head of Ross from Friends, with the couch, and he would just be pivot, pivot.
Right.
There were so many times where I had this idea and then I just had to pivot. And you talked about sales. Like I really had it in my mind that I wanted to be available online through Amazon and
Mhm.
other major retailers. And I am. And I'm really happy that people can go and press a
Okay,
button and
good.
buy and have it delivered now. I don't have boxes of books in my house.
Right.
But it did end up being really popular with local retailers. And so I did end up having to just like bite the bullet and order a number of books and have those boxes and, take
And
them
like
to the
drop them
school.
off.
Yeah. And so, like, one of the little catchphrases that I have for myself now is go with the yes. So like I'm not trying to
Oh,
bang
I
on a
love
bunch
that.
of doors, right? Yeah, yeah. And it's that is such a good thing. Like big picture and small, micro, macro, right? So like when I'm making big decisions, I try to think, okay, go with the yes, like where is the momentum, where's the energy, where are doors opening, go there. And
Mhm.
even in terms of like what book do I write? This is a book that just was coming together for me and people responded to and was happening. So okay, go with that one. And then in terms of like what are the retail channels or what events should we put on the calendar? If
Right.
you got a yes, that's the one you nurture.
Love it. So many great lessons in there for people that are listening. So what's next for you? You mentioned like you've got this big book idea. You received some coaching about, hey, maybe go after something smaller. So check, you got that done now as far as like this book. Do you see yourself writing more books for children? Do you see yourself getting into maybe more adult audiences? I'm just kind of curious, like where this path is going to take you.
Yeah, I definitely knew that once I had this idea for this book, immediately I knew that it could and would be a series. So I
Okay.
definitely want to replace Shield with other animals. And what I'm thinking right now is for at least for the first three, stick with the Pacific Northwest and do like one land animal and then one bird.
Right.
And so that would be a series. I could see this having a lot, a lot of iterations. You could definitely take it to different continents or do all sorts of different kinds of animals. So I definitely want to do that. But the next book will be a different children's book, and it's going to have a whole other audience. I have hearing and speech impediments. And I realized as an adult, when I started to feel comfortable talking about that around these diversity and inclusion conversations, we talk about access. And I realized that that's an area that's always sort of impacted me just a little bit.
Yep.
So started to talk about that a little bit more. And inevitably, adults would say to me, oh, it's no big deal. I can hear you just fine. Not, I noticed you had a speech impediment, but it doesn't impact my ability to understand you at all. And I realized, oh my goodness, nobody ever said that to me as a child. Even the people who are well meaning, they were really like very purposeful and intense, frankly, about trying to help. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be funny if we could have something or wouldn't it be great if we could have something that's kind of funny, kind of lighthearted, no big deal? So that's in the hopper. That one's
Okay.
coming along.
All right.
I'm purposely being dodgy about title and about
Yeah. Oh,
anything
no,
more,
for
but
sure. Yeah. Got to
coming
keep
up.
it under wraps. Yeah. For
That's
sure.
right.
Yeah.
But stay tuned. Stay tuned. I'm
Okay.
excited about that. I could also write a business book. There's one that I got sort of a table of contents on building. And I think I want to do like a tween and teen poetry anthology.
Mm.
So I'm thinking, at first I thought, because the first one went so quickly, I thought, oh, I'll write a book a year. And then I realized, oh my goodness, after you're published, oh my goodness, there's so much time. I was just saying to my husband this morning, is that I'm realizing how much activity there is in trying to produce a passive income. It's a lot. So I'm going to pace myself, but I do hope to publish maybe five. By the time I'm sort of semi-retired, that's the goal, is to get to the point where maybe I'm working a salaried job less, or
And then,
um,
and this could transfer into
and
something.
then transfer. And then I
Yeah.
don't see myself retiring. Frankly, at any point in my life, I'm really high energy. But if it were a semi-retire where I'm writing, and
Mhm.
then that novel that I do want to write, I just have to trust the universe that if it's mine to write, the time and the space will roll out for me. And if it's not, and it ends up that spotlight ends up switching and shining on someone else that has the time or space to write that excellent idea, then
Mhm.
more power to them. And I'll just trust that that's what needs to happen. But yeah, I definitely want to write more. I definitely want to be involved more in the art community. I'm loving the events and media. I love this. I love the Zoom calls with
Mhm.
kids. You
Yeah.
know, I'm thinking maybe YouTube Kids channel presence. I think there's maybe an opportunity for that,
Yeah,
and
for
just
sure.
see what else rolls out.
Really exciting. I love again, the creativity, the goals that you've got in place. But then there's also this like humbleness around, hey, you know what? I'm going to flex here, take care of myself here. Like, it's not like, you're on this hustle mission, to do all these things. And you're very cognizant about like, hey, I need balance as well. And so I hear that in your tone and in your actions, which is amazing. Because it sounds like you're very committed to what you want to do, but you're also, very conscious about doing it the best way that you feel good about, right? That this is not something that you want to like burn yourself out over.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I have to say that's an area of growth for me, and I certainly have not perfected it, but I do tend to, overdo it, and learning to have better boundaries and learning to be comfortable with like just running experiments. Like it's
Mhm.
not even um, like when I set a boundary, I think I feel like there's all sorts of repercussions for it, and it feels
Right.
like a heavy, and it feels like that's a big deal, and I have to get it right out of the gate. And
Mhm.
so to be comfortable experimenting with them and to say, well, I'll try this, and if it works for me, it does, and if it doesn't, it doesn't, and I'll
Right.
be good to everybody in my circle along the way. But I also trust that they'll be patient with me if I have a lesson to learn along that way too.
Love it. Okay. And then Sherry, you're also here to share your three uniques with us.
Ah, right, of
Yeah.
course.
So I'm
We're on
excited.
three uniques.
Yeah. So I'm excited to hear what they are. And I always say this to like my guests that come on, even though I get a glimpse into kind of what they are for the listener, I try not to look at them because just like you, I want to hear the three uniques for the first time and understand a little bit more about Sherry. Although you have given us a good glimpse into kind of like who you are as a person, but I'm curious how your three uniques now, like once I know them, how they show up in your life. So yeah, please
Yeah,
go ahead.
really interesting. And I'll add to that that when you and I first met, and we were sharing earlier, we were trying to remember when it was. I think it was a lean-in connection that we had at a conference or something where we were doing the Zoom networking. Um, but regardless, it was at least 6 months ago, maybe earlier, that I sat down and I went through your exercise, and I came up with my three uniques. And then when I knew that we were having this session, I pulled them out again, probably 2 weeks ago, and gave myself some time to think about it. And I kept thinking and kept thinking. I'm like, no, those still stick. So that was really a good exercise to see
Okay, good.
that they're there. So
Awesome.
yeah, I I put them in phrases that I found interesting, so they connect to me. So my three uniques are, first of all, as a liaison. So that is my stuck in the middle with me. And then something I'm calling see and show back, which is speech therapy. And then the third one is she who points at elephants.
I know, I saw that and I tried, like, I was like intrigued because I've been to Africa a couple times and I love elephants. So,
Oh,
yeah, so I don't want to start there. I want to still be in Saskatchewan.
okay.
So let's go to
Okay.
the first one, the liaison, stuck in the middle with you. What's that?
Right.
Yeah, how does that?
So I'm ambidextrous.
Oh,
Every personality test I take, they always find me in the middle. I'm
yeah,
introvert, extrovert. I'm a middle child. When I play sports, I'm midfield. When I sing, I'm a mezzo soprano. I'm in middle management. And my career choice is as a liaison between business and tech.
there you
Like
go.
every part of my life, it shows up that I'm in the middle. And
Right.
that was something that I struggled with. When I was younger, I didn't like being identified as a middle child because people would always point out the negatives. They just always say, well,
Yeah,
you're too old for this or too young for that. But of course, we grow up and we learn that, wow, that's a great skill to have. Like middle children are often really good facilitators, can often see
perceptive.
multiple sides. Yeah.
Yeah.
And same with ambidextrous. To be ambidextrous, a lot of people who are ambidextrous do find that, there's negatives. Like I still have to do this, like which is left and which is right. I have to think real hard about it. Um, but it's informs more things, like I think maybe that left side, right side of the brain,
Right.
being able to see multiple sides. So and maybe as an author, maybe it does make you more perceptive, but I just find like no matter what, I'm always in the middle, and I'm learning to embrace that. And I think that maybe there's a misperception that that means, or that that's not a skill that's necessarily thought of first when people think of leadership, but actually we're really learning that some of the best leaders are people that can facilitate, that can negotiate, that can see multiple sides, that can network and
Right.
liaison. So I'm learning to be happy with being stuck in the middle. It's not a bad
Well,
place to
I
be
was
stuck.
I was talking about this earlier with a client of mine because I coach people in this area, right? Understanding the three uniques and then how you align your three uniques with all areas of your life. And sometimes, like I generally believe that I think we know what makes us unique at a very early age, we have those ideas, similar to kind of like when kids like yell out that they want to be a fire person or a veterinarian or whatever those things are. There's something that's gravitating them to those those spaces, those skills, those abilities, and somewhere in there might be some conditioning. Maybe we got some feedback or some insight from somebody that said, "Oh, like and again, based off of their beliefs, their values, their experiences, and somewhere in there we tempered them. So I love the fact that you've been observant since being a child to like where you are now, where it's like this has shown up like regularly with me. And at times I've used it as a strength and a way to, be really effective in what I want to do. And at times maybe I've hidden it because I didn't think it was worthy or whatever, but you've got experiences on both sides, which I think is fabulous. And the fact that you are like, you recognize that it's actually, no, it's who I am, and I'm going to claim it now, and I'm just going to continue to use it to my advantage, which is amazing.
Thanks, Brenda. And actually, it's like we rehearsed this because that's such an amazing segue.
And we did not rehearse that, but
Not at all. I'm sure there's plenty of evidence going to come up at some point. But yeah, the second one for my three uniques is what I'm going to call like see and show back.
okay.
So and it is one of the sort of components of that is my level of observation. So I'll tell you, as a teenager, especially, this is where I really noticed it. When I was old enough to take my babysitting money and go to the movies, I would be so confused because I was paying so much attention that when the collar was open or shut, or the shoes were on or off, or whatever inconsistency there was, I couldn't. I still was staggered when I learned that was a mistake. Like I couldn't, first of all, grasp that you could have something as public and as repeated as a movie and leave a mistake in. That was kind of a moment for me to process. But the fact that nobody else was noticing it and nobody else was confused by it. And so one of the things that I've noticed over the years is quite often when we're confused, there's a good reason why. And when I'm training people, I sort of make it a little bit lighthearted. And I will often say to them when they're confused, I'll say, confusion is the path to understanding. Because when you dig down and you embrace that confusion, you go, what's confusing about that? Usually like apparent contradictions are actually then resolved to create the more fuller picture. So if we think about coding, you think about software development, and you think about an if-then statement, you might have an if-then at the top layer that has one result, but if there's other conditions that are true, then you end up with another end result. And so if you're looking at those two end results and you go, but they're inconsistent, I'm really confused. Oh, it's because there's something more complex. And that doesn't mean that there's something broken or that you've misunderstood. It just simply means it's more complex than you thought it was, and you need to observe. Right. And then that also dovetails into this idea of see and show back, because I realized like one of the skills that I have, which you show like in your beautiful Venn diagram, that sometimes it's your experiences, sometimes it's your skills. So definitely there's the skill that I get a lot of feedback on, and happens to also be my happy place, which is not coincidental, I'm sure, is diagramming. I love a diagram, and a happy place in my kayak, but another really geeky happy place for me is with a visual or lucid charts or some application.
I love them.
Right? Are you that?
I love, and some people are like not keen on organizational charts because you think of hierarchy and all these type of things, which I get. There's the downside of them, but I love charts, Venn diagrams. That's why when I created three uniques too, and someone was explaining it to me, like they wanted me to explain it to them, like, oh, well, it's three, like, yeah, it's a Venn diagram. Here's what it is, and sweet spot in the middle. But I find it's so much easier when I've got a picture in front of me, behind me, where I can like walk.
Exactly. I was just going to ask you that. So when it was in your head and it made perfect sense to you, it was a whole other conversation than when you took the time and you made the visual and you showed it back, right? And that's a buzz. That's a good thing. And I know before COVID, one of the few things I miss about working from an office, because I really, really, really love working from home. But one thing that used to just bring me so much daily joy would be to walk throughout the office and see some diagram that I'd made pinned up at somebody's area. Oh, my heart.
Or
right?
a wipe off board. Give me a wipe off board.
Oh my gosh. I actually have the remarkable, like I just live in this tool. I love it, love it. And yeah, I'm all about the swim lane diagrams. And then also, I think some of the value add that I bring to an organization, whether they ask me to or not, is that in an effort to understand a product, a ecosystem, a decision, I will diagram it. And I've learned over the years that the ones that I do for myself are generally the ones that are the most popular. So the lesson there is if you're asking that question, probably other people are too. And there's should be no, um, you shouldn't hold yourself back from exploring that. That's probably actually where the value is, right? So I will show them back. And then sometimes I'll get this feedback like, oh, that's too complicated. And then the thing that I can say that really needs to be said is, yeah, but that's the current state. Like, I'm not saying that this is what it should be. I'm showing back what it is, or I'm showing you back the parts that I understand and then
Right.
putting a big circle around what I don't. And can you help me here? Right. And they always get tweaked and there's revision, but it's always a point of understanding. And then when you do show it back, so the see and show back. So first of all, I see there's a problem here, there's a concern, there's a confusion, and then I show back, and then that gives us a tool for either improving understanding or changing and simplifying what is causing confusion, and typically both.
Love it. Okay. There's lots of parallels. This is why we needed to connect.
We
Um,
connected.
third unique.
Okay, so yeah, this is your
Oh,
one
the
that you are
elephant.
curious about. She who points at elephants, and I have not been lucky enough to go to Africa yet, but this is about the elephant in the room.
Ah, got
And right,
it. Yep.
and yeah, and so I'll share a bit of my personal history that I got a thumbs up to share. So I have a mother with severe mental illness,
Mhm.
and I grew up in a time where we didn't talk about that. In fact, I think even 3 years ago, I couldn't have said that,
Yeah.
right? It's been part of the conversation around COVID, part of the opportunity to step back and really observe things and to think about what's really important and improved connections. But I did have a conversation with my mom where I said, Mom, I think when I'm talking about my own life, it would really be helpful for me to explain this. But this isn't just my story, it's your story too.
Mhm.
Can I share it? And feel free to say no. And my mom was like, she'd been waiting. She's like, yes. And when you do, please tell them that it was nobody's fault, that even the doctors were doing their best, but they just didn't know.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't until, oh, what would it be? Probably just 7 years ago that I even understood why we didn't have a diagnosis for my mom. And so there never was a diagnosis, which really, really bothered me. A very lovely psychiatrist took some time and spoke with me about it and said, Sherry, the reason why we don't is the symptoms can change and there's a lot of overlap and the medications are generally the same. And so what we focus on is reducing the symptoms and not on the labels. And then that was like this huge weight off my chest. But because I grew up in this environment where there's this big, heavy, important, scary thing that we
Mhm.
had no words for and that we didn't really talk about,
Right.
right? I noticed that when I got into other situations, particularly in the workplace, and there'd be the elephant in the room, we're not going to make that project date. I'm pretty sure that that company is going to buy us out, or whatever it was, and whatever. But I find that I'm feel pretty comfortable having those uncomfortable conversations because none of them are equal to
What
the
you grew up
yeah
with. Yeah.
yeah, and then the
Yeah.
catharsis of finally being able to talk about something that was the unspoken. I mean, nobody even said, don't speak about that. We didn't even speak about, don't speak about that,
No,
right?
but there's a pattern of behavior, which is now like, and see, this is one of the things I think to sort of understand is like where our behaviors say come from and how this even impacts us in business or in leadership relationships at work. Is there's a pattern of behavior that was formed when we were a child. So naturally, we're going to think that this is just how the world operates until
Right.
until that worldview changes some way, going through school, maturity, adulthood, other relationships that we form outside of the home, where we're like, huh, nobody else is doing it like this, and we're the only ones. And but even then, is it safe to question? Is it safe to explore that, right? And considering it was about your mom and her situation, should we even talk about it? This is my mom's stuff, not my stuff,
Right.
but it impacts me. So there's all this stuff that's like flowing around in your head around it. And so until you stop that cycle and explore it and understand your thoughts that are getting generated from that and the feelings, and then how those show up in your actions, you're just going to continue on with that same pattern. So again,
So
I think it's a
true.
it's a great story. Through adversity, through obviously like some hard times maybe in your family as you were working and navigating through that, but to also come out the other side where probably, like you said, cathartic for your mom, cathartic for you to be able to say, hey, we can talk about this now and we can understand
Yeah.
it more.
Yeah. And I think I should just, in all fairness, say that, the thing that happens in our childhoods into adulthoods is that you, like you say, you absorb things whether or not they were intentional or even true. And so my sense that this is something that we don't talk about was not shared by all my siblings or other people in the family,
Mm.
right? So it's also a matter of perspective. So I just wanted to put that out there that it definitely is one of these outcomes that you can't necessarily unravel what the root cause is. You just know that at some point open up your bag of baggage. You
Yeah.
open up, you open up your things that you're carrying with you, and you hold them up to the light and you say, is that true? Yes or no? And you try and work through them. And then you find that you have different things in your bag than someone else that was on exactly the same journey as you. And you kind of could get stuck in, how did that get there? But really just, okay, it doesn't belong here.
Right. Yeah. Like, let's put it where it belongs. Um, and I think that you said it, like in the last like 3, 5 years, I think we're starting to see more um, safe spaces for people to explore these things, right? And I'm hopeful that we get to start exploring more of these things in the business community, because I think that the separation of personal and work, this whole like, I'll just leave this stuff at home and only bring this other self of me to work. Uh, we're evolving too much and too quickly as a human race, like between
Yeah.
communication, technology. You probably see this in your workspace. It's like it's just moving so fast. To say that we can actually intentionally separate those behaviors or those emotions or those feelings from the workplace and not bring them in, I just think right now it's not setting people up for success. It's not setting some companies up for success. It's not setting up the customer for success. Like, we have to look at all of those dynamics and say, okay, how do we embrace the whole employee and understand all of these things and create workplaces that will allow for those conversations, so that people can be their best. At the end of the day, it's like we want the best out of our employees, the people that are working there, and we want to do it in a way that makes them feel safe, heard, seen. So,
I absolutely love that. And I think that, we're learning about code switching and about, how we change our behavior to become more presentable.
mhm.
And certainly as women, that's been difficult. I'm old enough to know when you had to wear like a full suit with the shoulder pads and, all that kind of, right?
Yeah.
Or
Right
even
with
just
you.
yeah, or even just how like men have a much more simple uniform. They can put on like a polo shirt and Dockers, and it just sort of universally accepted. Whereas we're navigating a lot more to try to
Skirt
figure
is
out
too
how to.
short, skirt's too long. Like,
Right, is my lipstick too red? Should I have
yeah,
gone with a more subtle shade today?
right,
What
yeah,
do I do with this crazy hair of mine? It's not going to settle down no matter what I do. And of course, or I'll speak for myself. I'm a person of privilege. My heritage, my ancestry, has never closed doors for me as it has for other people. So I want to be sensitive to that there's definitely groups that have more code switching to do than I do, but I'm aware of it. And I think, a real conversation I'd really love for us to really start having, and you touched on it, is, bringing your authentic self to work, and how doing so helps us become better staff members, but also it reflects our customer base better, right? So if we're there to serve our
yeah,
customers are not suited up in ties. Our customers are not only going down the happy path. There's alternate paths, et cetera, et cetera. But also, the workplace can be terribly triggering. And I think there's kind of a form of victim blaming that happens with the individual contributor or the people that are maybe the receiver of policy in companies, where it's a lot like it's on the person to not be triggered, and certainly it's on every single one of us to behave in ways that are healthy, and that if we are feeling triggered and we're feeling like we might not be we're a stressed self better than our rather than our best self, right?
Right.
You got to remove yourself, you got to put your skills in place, take a walk, whatever you got to do. But I also think like we need to think about how some of the situations in work can be triggering. So I'll give an example. Let's say you were a woman that had was in an abusive relationship,
Mhm.
and you had a man that had a lot of authority over her, and you could switch the genders.
Sure.
Yeah, but you're in a situation where to be alone in a room with someone who's passing judgment on you is scary,
Mhm.
right? That in the past, if somebody felt like you didn't do a very good job, there were really big repercussions.
Right.
Then going through an annual performance review with a man
Mhm.
alone in a room, especially if the economies are tight and you feel like your job is at risk, and you right.
Which in this scenario, a lot of women have experienced, and we're seeing this mass exodus of women. So, not to stick in this gender specifically, but we're seeing that a lot in the last few years with COVID, women leaving the workplace in high numbers. So,
Yes.
I totally agree with you. I think, well, and I'll add another layer to it is that where in our timeline as women or just as adults did we learn how to set boundaries?
Oh,
Do we learn
yeah.
about our own value system? So I think like even just the whole conversation of values in companies really is only a 20-year conversation. Like if I go
Yes.
back to like my first early days of working, like I remember I was working with an organization. It was kind of my first job out of university, but I had been working with them for already 5 years, and that's when they first started putting in company values. Before that, we didn't have a value system. It was a new talk, like Ken Blanchard, like Malcolm Gladwell, those type of folks. Not Gladwell. I'm gonna forget his last name. Anyways, he's an executive coach. Peter Drucker, like those are the people that started talking about value systems. But if we go back to the 60s and the 70s, there were no
Hmm.
value systems in organizations. Like maybe the founder had family values that they kind of brought into their family owned business, but there were no company values. So this whole conversation about values and stuff is still relatively new in the
Yeah.
workplace. And so, yeah, you've got this scenario that you just painted. And then plus the fact that the boss or the employee has not learned how to set boundaries in their life.
Right.
They're not even setting boundaries with their own parents or whomever in their life. And then they don't even have maybe personal values articulated. So now they're in a situation where, yeah, there's like a dominant, figure over an employee that's maybe has some past trauma. So yeah,
Right. Yeah. And I was just
it's
gonna.
not a good situation.
Yeah, and do you even have the language to talk about trauma, or to be talk about being triggered, and the self-awareness? And then there's a journey that doesn't get solved overnight. And then are you in a safe space where you feel that you can talk about that? And I'm sure there's like, all sorts of variations on a theme. And you've got certainly there are bullies in the workplace, and that happens, but for
Right.
the most part you've got people that are well-meaning, kind,
Absolutely.
and they're putting on their best practice, like I've been told this is the way to do things.
Right.
And they're trying to go at it the best. And if you could just have that really healthy, hearty situation, then you could think like, what would make this better? Like, what if we did the performance review, but instead of sitting across the desk, could we go for a walk together? um, could we go to a coffee shop and have a coffee? Something like that. And I think that so there's about bringing your authentic self to work,
Yeah.
and which is long overdue. And I think that being working from home has been great for that. You might see a kid or a pet or a pile of laundry in the background.
Sure.
Yeah, we're human. Or you might cook your meal up with a late afternoon meeting, and that stuff is great, and it kind of makes you wonder why we didn't do it before. But then there's also about the real meaty, heartfelt stuff. And I truly, truly believe that if we can address that as peers and as colleagues in the workplace, it's going to permeate out, and it's going to make our organizations better members of the community, create better products, create better,
Absolutely. Well,
right?
more relatable. At the end of the day, it's like consumers buy products that they can relate to and that they see of high value. So if we're listening because we're being authentic, we'll connect in with those customers that also want the same thing. So
Yeah, I think about that in tech, and I'm just thinking about how that relates back to like She Who Sees Elephants. Like I've been in demos where people are demoing back something, and everybody's nodding their head and going, "Yep, that's lovely." And then afterwards, like whisper, whisper, like, "I had no idea what that. Do you understand?" And like, yeah, we
yeah,
need to just talk about that. If during the meeting said, "I don't
right.
get it," and
Yeah.
then someone backs 3 screens up and says, "Oh, you're here," and then oh, that makes sense now. But to have the bravery to actually be vulnerable and to show that in the moment
Hmm.
is. I want to see more of that, but I'm really, really glad again to be positive. I'm really, really glad that we are seeing that, and I'm really glad, like you say, 20 years ago we didn't see core value statements unless you maybe saw something on the boss's wall.
Right.
But for staff members to be asked to think about core values and core values to be on a coffee mug and to be lived and exemplified, that's amazing. And
Mhm.
now we're starting to talk to people about, well, what are your own personal core values and how do you bring that to the workplace? And then we're talking about, well, how are you productive and what do you want to offer and what are your career goals, and really enabling people.
Mhm.
And we can even do things like data. You can create profiles, and you can look at your customer database, and then you can go, if they're all looking like white middle-aged men, did we mean that? Is that intentional? Or is there maybe something that we need to dig into a little bit further here to see if
Right.
there's an opportunity for growth? And maybe there's a lot of money there. Maybe there's an untapped market you haven't reached. I would posit there probably is, right?
Yeah. I love it. I love this conversation. We've gone from children's stories all the way to data points around diversity and inclusion. This is amazing.
Well, and I will point out, if we're going to go full circle, there is
Okay.
like a diversity and inclusion element in the book. So some of the themes that came through was we were really careful to make sure that our child that's in the book is like a universal child. So you can't tell from the image of the child the race or the gender or
Gender.
even the age. And that was really intentional. There's very little that the artist came up with that I didn't just like high five immediately, but that was one was like, can we work on that a little bit?
Hmm.
And then we were talking about authenticity, which I think really comes from empathy. So the whole idea of like what the seal saw, like you're putting yourself in the eyes of the seal. And so rather than be preachy about environmental responsibility, talked about instead just experiencing the world and leading with curiosity and exploring the world with curiosity, because when you're curious, can't be anxious at the same time, right? It's a whole
Yeah.
other mindset. Um,
Yeah. We just take in the beauty and then we want to preserve that beauty versus like, yeah, making us feel bad or guilty or shameful or judging us for, maybe not necessarily caring about our environment. I love that because it
yeah,
also, I think like when you think about your audience, the child, we don't want them to feel bad about something that other people have done. And now this is the planet they're inheriting. I know that there's a lot of stressors that get played on younger children or younger adults that, wow, now I've got to clean up the mess that my parents,
yeah.
grandparents, and my great grandparents created for me. So I think, just approach nature from a sense of beauty and then get curious about it. And how can you be more involved in it and have a presence in it?
Yeah, and we, it's interesting. I'm just seeing all these places where it overlaps. So we were talking about self-awareness, like if you're aware of yourself, so maybe there's some trauma, maybe there's some boundaries, maybe there's just some growth, maybe there's just something changing. And we've all had to undergo a lot of change in the past couple of years, right? So if you're curious about it rather than being anxious, like no judgment, I noticed that, I noticed that. Um, um, I tend to go and find in search of chocolate at 3 p.m. I wonder what that's about.
Well, you probably find some other listeners on this podcast that would agree with you. That's a good time. Or maybe they might say 2:30 is their limit. Sherry, my last question for you is if I was to give you a billboard and it could be anywhere in the world and you could put anything on it, where would it be and what would you put on it?
Wow. Well, we didn't rehearse this because I didn't have a chance to think about that at all. Um, well, now your listeners are gonna fire up some music because I'm thinking so hard. Okay, I'll go with the one of the themes from the book,
Sure.
which is lead with curiosity.
Mhm.
And I'm going to take your question and kind of take it to a little bit of the esoteric. So rather than it being one geographic spot, I would want to put it outside of every school. I would say, okay, as you're growing, as you're learning, as you're exploring, and I think it's true, like whether it's elementary or all the way up to high school, like just lead with curiosity. And the lead is sort of a two-part. Like you can think of lead as leadership, and absolutely. And when you're applying leadership skills, do it with curiosity. I wonder what this marketplace would be like. I wonder what would happen if we interviewed people who are older. I wonder what would happen if we tapped into this talent pool. That's a good oh, I wonder if we develop the product that we need. Could go a lot of different ways, but
Right.
leading with curiosity. But it's also lead as in start. Start. Your first position should be curiosity. And I really think that one of the great woes of the modern age is this polarization and this tribalism, and where we're just in camps for I align with this theology or this person, therefore I can't talk to or I can't digest any information from this camp. But if we strip that away, and our first response was curiosity. I wonder why they feel that way. I wonder why they say that. I wonder what they're trying to accomplish. I wonder what I can learn from this. I think that that would make a huge difference in the world. So lead with curiosity outside of every school on a big billboard. And the really positive message for something you already have and can just nurture.
Amazing. Sherry, thanks so much for being on today and sharing your three uniques with us.
Thank you so much, Brenda.
And for everyone listening, I always say at the end, there's 7.8 billion people on this planet, so get out there and share your three uniques. Take care, everyone.